Hello everyone, this is Seth Thompson, and I'm going to take a few minutes to show you guys a little bit about how I set up the metal shader for this cauldron, as you see in the render here, and that was in the turntable I had up the other day. So first thing, here is my shader. It's just a basic VRay material. I've called it a cauldron. And a couple of things I want to show you guys is within the maps down here. I'm just using a very tiny bit of diffuse. I'm doing some stuff with a mix and a reflect channel, and then I'm doing a reflect glossiness and then also something in the bump. Now for metal to work properly, diffuse and reflect are your two main properties that you want to mess with, and then reflect glossiness is important to mess with the settings that you have up here, where you see I have a 0.8, but it's not as important to have a map plugged in. That's just if you want more control. So out of the box, if I render, this is what I get right now. But I just want to show you guys a few things, what will happen if I turn off a few things. So for one, color really isn't too important for what you need to do whenever you're doing reflection. So if I just turn this off right now, and I have a default of pure black, let me show you what we get with this render. Just update this really quick. I have really low settings in my VRay render right now. So what you can see now is we're getting pretty much the same render we had a second ago, but with very little color information. And you know, this feels pretty good because some of the color is being driven by an Hdri map that I have in here right now. I'm going to click this Show VRay History button window. This is a really useful technique. Now what we can see is this will save previous versions of our renders, so I'm going to click this Save button. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit A for this previous one, and then I'm going to set B for one I had right before this, and we can kind of drag back and forth to see the color variation. Well, here's one that was really colorful. But anyways, you can see right now, still getting a little bit of color, and that's just because we have a nice reflection map working in here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this off to the side. I'm going to turn this back on, my diffuse map, and basically the idea is that metal is almost always black, almost any property that you're using with just slight tiny hints of color information. So for example, here's a map that I'm using within here, basic color map that I have within the diffuse channel. I think I'm also using it as my reflect channel. And what I've done here is I've actually added a color correction node. And I will just open this little preview window right here, and what I've done in here is I turned this way down because I didn't want it too bright. I want to show you what happens if we increase the saturation on this as well as the brightness back to what we used to have. Let's do another quick render here. Now you can see this thing is really blowing out. That's why if you put any color information into your piece, make sure it's very minimal, otherwise you'll get something really bright like this. That might be good for something like a bronze or some other type of metallic type, or if you're doing a plastic, but obviously this isn't what we want in the cauldron. So right off the bat, a lot of people think that, yeah, I need to put bright color information into my diffuse channel, but it's just not the case. You don't want to do that. So I'm going to turn this back down so that we have it really dark again. And now whenever we do this, you'll see that we start to get the nice dark colors again. Okay, I'm going to cancel that. So I'm going to go up here in the stack, and the next thing I want to show you guys is the reflect amount, what we have in here. And I'm just going to deactivate our map for a second. And let's go ahead and do a quick render. And now you're going to see this is really blowing out bright. So super, super, super bright. And that's because we are not driving the information properly without having a map in there. So basically what's happening right now is the reflect, I have it up to pure white, which means it's going to pretty much reflect anything that you put in a scene. Pure white's going to reflect a ton. And then if we were to switch this now to pure black, we're going to get pretty much no reflection, as you see up here, or a mid-gray value. You start to see a little bit of reflection. So this mid-gray value is more along the lines of what I'm doing within my actual map, but I just want to show you here, even with a pure color, you can start to get some of those reflection values working nicely. So let's cancel this. I'll just switch this back to the default white that we had, and now I'm going to re-enable our reflect map here. And what I've done is I basically just added a mix node I mix between maps constantly. That's just something you can find in here underneath the standard materials mix. And once you put that in here, then you can put different maps that you want. So I'm going to preview these maps that we have. You'll remember a minute ago I had a yellow color information map. That's because I like to use the same maps over and over that I drive color or different things with, and then everything just syncs up. So what we have in here is we have one that's bronze green bump, as I call it, and this is driving the bump for my piece. And then I'm mixing that just slightly with a blue tinted version of my map from before. So the important thing about that is in the end you can see that we have kind of like a mid-gray value, which, as you remember a second ago, this was a mid-gray value that was giving us this standard reflection that still looked pretty good. But what's happening now is, in addition to having that mid-gray value, you can just slightly tint it a bit with this little bit of blue color information. So if I come in here now, let's just do a quick render again, you'll start to see some of the color coming through. So your reflect maps, whenever you do this, they should be really close to white, and then you just tint them a little bit with the color, and that slight bit of color will start to bring out what your metal would look like. So for something like this with the cauldron, I'm just adding a little bit of blue into it because I like that for my scene. But maybe for I don't know, something like a steel, you know, you might use a blue. Maybe for like a bronze, you would slightly tint it a little bit green. In fact, let's just do that really quick. If we come in here, this is another cool thing. Click on bitmap, and you see me use this all the time. Color correction, super, super useful. Grab that. Keep old map as submap. I want to do that. And let's just shift this into the green level. Now, if we can get it to go green. Here we go. So now let's, I'm going to go ahead and save this render really quick so that we have that. And let's render this one more time. And you can even start to see now a little bit of that green information that's coming through. It's very, very subtle, but you can see it. And when I do a comparison here in just a minute, you'll really see it come through. Okay, I'm going to save that. I'm going to set this one as B. And the one that we had a second ago, I think, was A. I think I'm getting these mixed up a little bit, so apologies. A, B. Okay, so here you can see it's slightly green, and here you can see the original. So even just slightly tinting these can really make a difference in your scene. So be sure to play around with those settings and just have fun with it and see if you can come up with something that looks cool. So I'm going to go back up here. I'm just going to turn off this color correction that I did. So now we're back into our original blue value. And I love using these mixes because you can just, by here, change this amount 100%. Then you just have like the pure color. If I had it 0, now I have that other black and white color. So really powerful mix node here. Final thing that you want to start playing around with is your reflect glossiness. So what I'm going to do to start with, and by the way, a lot of times even without rendering, I just have the shader preview ball up, and if you right click this and change it to like drag rotate, you can see what your material is going to look like pretty quickly without ever having to render. So reflect glossiness, let's just turn off this and see what happens right away. Now you can see it's getting really, really bright, and basically that's because we're not blurring out the reflection value. So reflect glossiness, basic way to think about this is if you have this, by default I think it's set to like a 1. If you have it at 1, it's really clean reflection. If you have it at 0, there's almost no reflection. It's completely blurred out. So let's change this back to like a 0.8. Usually a sweet spot I think for metal is anywhere between like 0.65, which is more like sometimes what I'm doing with the cauldron once I put my map into like a 0.8, which starts to get you really shiny, feeling like it's polished metal. And by default, this Fresnel reflections is not turned on, so yours is probably going to look like this if you do it, and you can see that now looking very chromy. I guess the idea behind reflect glossiness is at 1, it's like a mirror, right? If you were to render this right now and there was a reflection in here, you would see it pretty much straight off. And you can even see in here, you know, it feels almost like Terminator 2 model, and it's purely reflecting everything that's in the scene. That reflection is like glass, and the only reason it's breaking up right now is I have a bump map on it. If I didn't have a bump, you would just see a perfect reflection in here. And now if we were to change this all the way down to 0, it's still going to be reflective, but the reflection value is going to completely blur out. So this, the reason it's so bright is because it actually is reflecting stuff in the scene right now, but the reflection is so washed out and so blurred you can't make out what's going on. But that's why it's so bright right now as well. And then, for example, we come in and we change this more to like a mid value, 0.5. And then this is going to start to feel a little bit more like that kind of old cauldron metal feeling to it. So I just recommend you guys go in, and before you even plug any maps into these, just play with these different settings. All you need to play with really is reflection value. Change that between the white and black. The reflect glossiness values, mess with that between the default of 1 and 0, and just find something that's going to work for you. So I'm going to switch this back to 0.8, which is what I have as my production render right now, which you can see is very, very bright in here and very metallic. But then what I'm doing is I'm actually using a map to drive the properties of this a little bit better. And the reason I decided to use a map to do this is because for all the little pitting and everything else that we have in here, I want that to help drive what's going on. So again, you remember this map that we were using a minute ago, that bump map? I've taken that and I put that in here, and I've really cranked up the value a bit. So the cool thing about this is anywhere where it gets a little bit black, the value is going to get cleaner, and where it's white, it's going to get blurrier. I think it's that or the other way around. You have to look into it a bit more, but it's one of those things. The other thing here I've done is I've enabled this color map. So by default, it's like this. So let me enable this color map and quickly render this again. And you know what? It's still shiny because I think I forgot to reactivate that. Yes, click that back on. So let's do that again and render. This should be getting us back to our original value that we had previously. It's pretty close. I think I tweaked some settings, so some stuff has changed as I've been giving you guys a demo here because it's clearly much brighter. But you get the idea. So let's cancel that. Click in here. And playing with this color map will definitely get you some different results. Now you can see that this thing is really grayed out. So remember again, the more you gray this out, the more kind of unclear the reflection is going to be, the more blurred out. So I'm going to enable this again, and by default in here, this is usually just kind of turned off. So you can just come in here and say add point, and then switch to this move function. And the idea of this is just to get a really nice fall off, so a ramp of the metal as the different facing angles is doing a nice transition. I won't really get into the full details of that because honestly sometimes I don't know exactly how it works. I just see results and I like what happens. So get in there, play with that a little bit, enable a color map, and then you'll start to see some different values occurring in here that can provide some pretty cool looking results. Already this is a little bit too bright, and I think that's because my reflection glossiness value previously at the beginning of this was more like a 0.65, and we changed it up to like a 0.8 or something like that. But I think you kind of start to get the idea of how this stuff works. The other thing that's really important to show you guys is, you know what happened is the reason that it's changing a little bit is I didn't have for now reflections turned on. And I do this because it gives you a better fall off around the edges. It gives you a hotter source in the center, and then it'll fall off a little different around the edge. Don't quote me on that. A lot of times I'm just clicking buttons and trying different things, but you can read up on it if you want to in VRay documentation. But I usually will turn this on for now reflection, and then I will adjust this. By default it's like a 1.6. You can just get in and start playing with the different numbers. Like literally all the time I'll render stuff small, then I'll increase things like crazy, see how it reacts. You can see there it just changed. 1.6 now, it gets very, very dim. as much as you can, just iterate on these material balls to get a good look with something before you really go into it and dig through it. The next thing that you guys need to know, the final thing, but it's also important as you're setting stuff up, is your IOR level, the index of refraction. I think by default it's around 1.6, and this is just really not going to work for us whenever we're trying to render. Or maybe it will. Let me check and see what's going on. Huh. This is strange. I must have made it work so well that now it's just working in every situation. Normally, something that's around 1.6, things like that's going to be good for plastic. But within metal, you're usually going to want to go anywhere from about maybe 16 to around 22. And that'll start giving you a good reflection value. I'm not sure why something's not changing at the minute, but anyways, a good sweet spot probably around 22. Just set something like that if you're trying to match this type of metallic feel with a cauldron, and you could go up to maybe like a 24 and down to around a 16 or 18. And after that, I think that's pretty much most of what I was doing in here. So for those of you that are curious how I was creating that metal, hopefully that helps explain a little bit. Maybe you don't know I didn't explain enough that scientifically we know what's going on, but hopefully it does give you guys a good idea of what's happening. If I had to say one final thing, it would probably just be that I've lit this scene currently with just one Hdri light, which is attached to a VRay light with a dome on it. So I'm going to close this. I can just show you guys that really quick. Here we go. So underneath my modifier list, it's just a VRay light, as you can see here, and then I have a switch to dome, and then down here underneath the use texture thing I have a VRay Hdri map, and basically what that is for, I assume most of you know how Hdri mapping works, but there's actually a VRay Hdri map that you can choose. And the way to get to that is just, I usually will find like an empty map channel somewhere, and I come down to the VRay drop down, and you'll find it right in here, VRay Hdri. You can pick that, and then you can plug your map into this section. Then what I usually do is I'll just switch this to a drag and copy, and you can drag right into your material once you have a map in there. So you have to put a map in, and then usually by default you want to have it on something like angular. But on mine, I think currently I have it set to spherical, which isn't technically correct, but I was liking the reaction I was getting. And then you can go through, and once you have that in, you can do things where you kind of rotate this, and you'll see this little map actually rotate, and that'll give you different lighting effects. And also too, it's important to have something like that, a nice Hdri map or something to reflect within your metal. Because if you don't have it in there, let's just really quickly go back to the camera view, and we try to render right now. It's just not going to have anything cool to reflect in here. So this is what's happening, right? It's just reflecting what's available in the scene right now, which is nothing. So if we turn that back on, now of course it's going to look awesome because it thinks that there's this really nice environment to reflect. So if you're doing that at home and you're wondering like, why isn't my stuff looking cool? You need to make sure you have an Hdri map or something for it to reflect. You could have a scene with just tons of models in it and they can reflect that, or something like this. Okay, that's about it. I figured this would be easier than me making a bunch of images together. I hope it was useful. Feel free to ask me any questions, and if you made it through the entire tutorial, I appreciate it. I figure maybe at least one or two of you will that watch the videos. Other than that, I will have a new art piece coming out soon. I was hoping to have it done today, but it's looking more like next week, so maybe after 4th of July. So you guys have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.